There's an Indian game that we learned to play. It was hey oi snatching, come forth laughing. That was our own game, and our older people taught us that. Of course, they used to play with us too. We'd have two sides, 10 on that side and 10 on this side. They'd put a clamshell on the stick, and then they'd make us go after that shell, try to get it without laughing or cracking a smile or anything. And they'd be saying everything to make you laugh. And they'd make us laugh, and when we'd start laughing, we'd have to turn around and go back and let somebody else try it. They called that hey oi snatching, come forth laughing.
My earliest recollection is living in the village, first 5, 6 years of my life. The village run for about a mile along the shore of Suquamish. That's where we always seemed together, elders and children, sometime through the day. The life of the people at that time wasn't too complicated. Get up and do whatever chores or work they had to do. There was really no schooling as we know it today. What they taught them was how to survive. You just had to live by the old Indian culture. Hunt, fish, whatever you can get, and the resources there was around here. You learned it from the elders. They'd teach you and tell you yarns of what they had to do to survive in this country.
They took what they needed, and that's all. There was nothing wasted. That's quite important among the Indians, that you should respect the earth.
We kind of shared with one another. They didn't have but very little. The old man, he'd go out and hunt these porpoise. Then he'd bring them in and then barbecue them. Then he'd invite everybody around to come down and have some.
When they want to preserve clams, they cook it in this open fire. And they had a little rack they used to put them on. They used this cedar bark to string them together. They could keep that all winter and it won't spoil because it's really dry.
The Indians went up in the mountains when they was berry picking. They didn't just stay in one little area all the time. Actually, they were all over the country. Took their fish and they visited with the people from eastern Washington. And they traded back and forth, and then if they wanted to go, they'd go.
In the winter, they were all in one place. About the only activity then was if you wanted to go out and dig clams or spear fish, hunt deer. But the big run of salmon was all over and all solid and dried. Some of the men would be working on carving. Cedar is something that represented a way of living to the people because they used cedar an awful lot. If they wanted to camp somewhere, they'd always look for a cedar tree, because they always figured if you was under that cedar, you didn't get all that rain. They called it shabalap. It means dry underneath, and you'd find that in a cedar tree. The rain just sheds off to the side. The only non-Indian on the reservation prior to 1910 was the sub-agent they had from the BIA office. When they told you something, it was law. That's the way it had to be. Non-Competency Act was used an awful lot when they wanted to sell somebody's land. Just because he was old and somebody wanted, they declared him incompetent. The land was put up for sale. Whatever the highest bid was for that tract of land, that's what the agent would accept, whether it was low, high, or not. And right at that time, that's choice waterfront property. They generally left a chunk of it so that you'd keep living there. Then they'd dish out the money to you, about $25 a month for for man and wife, but they never made any allowance for the children if they had children. What happened when they sold that, they got them scattered all over the Suquamish reservation. They're quite a ways apart. So I think those were two of the worst things that happened. The first one was when they made us move off. A lot of the culture was lost right down by the people not being able to get together. Then they took you off to school, and while you got white man education there, you lost what you could have learned at home.
This Dr. Buchanan ordered the Indians.
He was in charge of all the reservations on the Sound. He was under my dad.
Over?
Yeah, he was over my dad. He tried to get my dad to pressure the Indians to go to a little boarding school. My dad wouldn't pressure, so they had him transferred to South Dakota.
This all came about during the Theodore Roosevelt administration, and Roosevelt's idea was to make citizens out of the Indians as fast as possible.
My folks broke the news to us that we were to go to this school. Mother didn't like it very well, but she said it just had to be done. They picked us up in a boat and took us down there. Then at the end of the year, they bring us back. Next year, the same thing. It was more military than a lot of people thought it was. They had companies, just like the Army. Then they had marching competition, the girls and the boys, and by God, we couldn't beat those girls. The girls were better marchers than we were.
Everything was very regimental. I didn't want to stay there. I hated it. I wanted to be at home because it was quite lonesome. It was really a wonderful place for boys because there were many trades. There was the ironworks, the farming, the tailor shop, but nothing for the girl. Not that much. There weren't too many things that the little kids could do, but we darned socks. Since that time, I have never darned a sock in my life. I thought I'd go barefooted first.
I used to cook so much for the Shaker meetings, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to this boarding school, maybe I'll learn something else. Do you know that when I got there, they just threw me right into the kitchen work again. Oh, brother, I thought I was getting away from the kitchen work.
I went to high school. I kind of objected to taking a foreign language. So I had a little argument with the teacher. They wanted me to put foreign language down there. I told them I had one. English, that's foreign to me. They asked me, what do you mean it's foreign? I says, well, when I started to school, I could only talk Indian. I says, English is foreign to me. He thought about it a little while, and he says, well, I guess you're right, it is.
They made them even stop talking Indian and want them to forget their Indian ways and learn the way of white people. But now they come back and want them to steady up on what the Indians used to do.
I was away for about 8 years going to school. In that lifespan of 8 years, a lot of changes took place. The influx of the non-Indians really changed our way of life. I think the main strength of the Suquamish people is that they've always been able to fish and dig clams and get what they needed. While a lot's been taken and disappeared, they still have the strength to go out and adapt to other ways of living and still keep their own culture. Fishing has been the main part of their culture all their lives. I think it'll stay the main part unless the fishing disappear entirely. And if it did, I think they can well adapt to other means of living.
My dad was a logger, and he never was hardly home. My mother raised us alone, might as well say, because when he go to a logging camp, he'd go and stay away for a month and then come home with a check and groceries and our clothing.
When you were logging, you worked from daylight to dark. from kin till cant, as we used to call it. My God, those hours could get awful long.
When the mill was striking, the longshoremen were striking, and there was no work here at all. We went picking hops. They'd all go up the river in canoes and find a place where somebody needed help, and they'd all move there and make a village of their own till the hops were all gone. It was something to earn a few dollars a day.
The clams, in those days, right after the Depression, if you had a contract with the market, say for 3 sacks on Monday, that meant just what they said. Because there was plenty of people waiting in line to grab that job if you once slipped up.
I went to work for the government. I never will forget this date. It was the 29th of May, 1940, and I stayed with it. I started right on the bottom as a laborer, and then I worked up to foreman pipe fitter when I retired.
I worked, I imagine 10 or 12 years at the oyster plant shucking oysters. I was working there when I was 75 years old, and that's when I quit.
I really worked. I worked in the hospital, the shipyard, I worked in the Boeings, and when them closed, I went back to the laundry, and I worked in the nursing home, and then out in the fields, planting strawberries. I did all those things. I really enjoyed that work, and I was young again, I'd do it all over.
We didn't have much of anything, but we still never went hungry. We always had something to eat. Like I always said, they couldn't starve me to death anyhow. As long as the tide went in and out, I could live on clams.
Everything was plentiful because they just took what they needed and left the rest. Same way when they were on the beach, they'd never try to dig all the clams that was there. They leave spots so they'd have a chance to return. After all this time, I get looking the way things are done and what's going on. Atomic bombs and one thing and another, use very many of them, this old earth won't be worth living on. Who's right? I've asked myself that quite a few times in the last few years. And when I look at what we're doing to it, I begin to think the old Indian was right.
There's an Indian game that we learned to play. It was "Hey, oi, snatching, come forth laughing."
They took what they needed, and that's all. There was nothing wasted. That's quite important among the Indians.
And we kind of shared with one another. Then he'd invite everybody around to come down and have some.
The Indians traveled all over. They didn't just stay in one little area all the time. They were all over the country.
The only non-Indian on the reservation prior to 1910 was the sub-agent. When they told you something, it was law.
By God, we couldn't beat those girls. The girls were better marchers than we were.
Since that time, I have never darned a sock in my life. I thought I'd go barefooted first.
If you had a contract with the market, say for 3 sacks on Monday, that meant just what they said.
I really worked. I worked in the hospital, the shipyard, I worked in the Boeings. I did all those things. My grandmother, she used to tell me, in time to come, you'll have to tell the story. But you know, I never thought I was going to get old.